Welcome everybody to the Intellectual Deep Web Extravaganza. I thought I would read something before we begin, because many people may be watching on the internet don't know what the Intellectual Deep Web is. And our friend Layman Pascal wrote a very nice description of the Intellectual Deep Web. So I'm going to read it here. The Intellectual Deep Web, a name that parodies and transcends the notorious intellectual dark web, is a contingent of high-powered neo-philosophers lurking at the edge of the so-called emerge field. They are voracious, combative, obscenely well-read, performative, enticing, off-putting, fast and deeply attuned to the leading edges of technosocial, occult, spiritual, psychoanalytic, and cultural enfoldment. Their vision of upgrade in a time between worlds is a dark renaissance. This concept takes archaic futurism, technophilia, phallic vigor, immanent transcendence, interactivity, emergent information worldviews, artistry, meta-localism, and emergent religion, and combines all that with an intoxicating affirmation of negation, dissonance, abysses, and exclusionary boundaries. Oh, and don't forget their deep skepticism about the unprocessed sexual and aggressive tendencies that might be locking the rest of us in a toothless and doomed utopianism. So that's Layman Pascal's description of the Intellectual Deep Web. So you're here at what we call Parallax Sangha. This is our fourth kind of big meeting. And Parallax Sangha has lots of activities going on. Please find out about us. Check out our link, and we'll put links in the description about what we're up to. We have all kinds of things going on, including a men's group, an arts group, and all kinds of emerging activities. I'm teaching a course. Personally, I'm teaching a course at Parallax as part of the Parallax series on rebuilding religion. My course is going to be called Practical Magic and Symbolism. So check out all the activities associated with this group. And what I would like to do now is I just like to maybe randomly, go around in a circle and just find out, have people introduce themselves, tell everybody what you're up to, what's on the edge, what are you thinking about, and what are your visions and hallucinations and exaltations for the new year. So I have Raven on my right, and so to be a polite and gentlemanly and old-fashioned, I will say ladies first, and Raven can begin this.
Oh my goodness.
Event.
Put me on the spot. I always really like to go last, but I'll take the invitation. Hi everybody. I'm Raven. So what's happening? I mean, I've been traveling in Europe for about 6 months now, going from city to city and visiting with all of these mad, crazy Europeans who are taking me through this process of becoming a lot more civilized, I would say. American culture, I really do feel like I landed here in a naive creature, and Europe is corrupting me for good or for ill. So I was just in London with Owen, and the two of us are beginning to sense into what the Dark Renaissance Project means for our creative collaboration. When we met, there was just like so much creative chemistry between the two of us that we weren't really sure exactly what direction we were going to take things. So now we are creating a performance project that's primarily around music and dance and dark poetry and the deep Renaissance topics and blood and gore and sex and pornography. So that's one of the things that he and I are working on. And then otherwise, sex is a big theme for me this year, and of course, psychedelics. And also Gerard is coming in, trying to navigate and through my own life without falling into the pits of metaphysical desire. This is one of the personal lessons that I'm working on at the moment right now. So I'm thinking there's maybe a podcast that may be born on the horizon this year, get me back into the digital realm, which I've been neglecting recently. So you'll be hearing more from me this year on these platforms. So I'm excited to bring that forth. So I'll be polite and pass it along. But thanks for being here, everyone. It's going to be a lovely conversation.
Why don't you just call somebody out, Raven? We can do it that way. Each person can.
Oh, okay. Okay. Yeah, I want to hear what Fraga's been up to.
Yeah, good stuff. So what I've been up to and what I'm going to do for this year is to bridge IDW-inspired philosophy with the tech world through design. So let's take ontological design from the realm of philosophy. Let's take the fact that it's so informed by so many interesting thinkers in our network and so many great philosophical references, and let's make it something that works as a design methodology that can be applied in concrete projects, because this is what's needed right now, because AI is just moving super fast, and there's definitely need for critical design perspectives. And I'm just fascinated with the concrete aspect of that. That's what I've been working with, the connection between data, design thinking, and technology and ontological design. That's my main thing for 2023, to take philosophy and to just take all these concepts and just do something with them. That's my yearning, and hopefully I'll get it. So yeah, with that said, let me kick the ball to Mr. Alexander Bard.
Thanks, Daniel and Raven. I just got back from Southeast Asia after 6 weeks in Bali, and a very interesting detour to Qatar on the way back. Nothing is more inspiring to go to a place which didn't exist 30 years ago, had billions of dollars thrown at it, and then just see what people have done with it, which is really fascinating. I love extremes, you know me. I've been working very hard on the English version of the Process and Event book. The Swedish version is basically done. It's going to be 1,400 pages thick, 18 chapters, possibly peak work for me as a philosopher. We'll see. But it's coming out, if not in April, then in May. So that's what I've been focusing on. Lately, a couple of topics relating to the intellectual deep web that's come up is that I've gone back this last month to the idea that we haven't really understood interactivity at all. It's one of those words we've used over and over and over again for the past 30 years. And we talked about Marshall McLuhan and media and interfaces and how the medium is the message and all those things. But we haven't really begun even to understand how radically different interactivity is from anything else we've experienced before in history, and how it's even impossible to communicate to anybody any longer with any sort of authority without having themselves on board. So I'm interested in seeing where that's going next, to really dig deep into the interactivity and really to understand what it means to do interactive communication, like we're practicing here right now. It's so different from anything we've seen in the past. And now we see all the old institutions fall apart. I think they're trying to pull off another World Economic Forum in Davos this year. I know even the founders of the forum have left now. They're out. It's like everybody's running for the door to get out of Versailles because the streets of Paris are burning, in the sense that the new paradigm has arrived, full scale, Elon Musk taking over Twitter. This is just the beginning. There's also a very, very interesting thing going on here, which is the upcoming war between Bitcoin and Ethereum. Ethereum have sided with the old paradigm. Clearly, they've sold out big time. Maybe that was the plan all along. But the Bitcoin community fascinates me with this ferocious sectarianism, its extremism, its fundamentalist attitude. And Victor Widblom and I have decided the next 5 years to do nothing but go around the world and visit these different digital nomadic communities, basically focus on the Bitcoin phenomenon and see what's happening. A bank in Panama have just decided to be the bridge between Bitcoin and the traditional fiat currencies. And that is so radical, what's going on right now, that That's going to be interesting to follow next year. Another topic, just to round it off before we go with the presentation, is that when I set off here to Thomas Hamelryck, is that I basically discovered that the three brains of a Gordian are already in Indian philosophy, and this is the division of yoga. The Yananga yoga, the karma yoga, and the bhakti yoga clearly are the three brains that we human beings have. It is the emotional brain, the rational brain, and the mimetic brain. And the mimetic brain is the karma yoga. If you have time to go into it tonight, I'm thrilled about that discovery. It's going to be in the book as well. But I just want to round it off there. So next on, maybe to Daniel Garnier. There we go.
Well, thank you, Mr. Bard, and congratulations on the book. Look forward to it. Daniel Raven, lovely. So I live in Central Virginia. My wife and I ride under OG Rose, live on a farm, run a venue, do whatever the kids demand of us. So different things like that. I've been doing a lot of work recently on bringing together counter-Enlightenment thinkers, Scottish Enlightenment thinkers into the thinking of Hegel, as well as doing work on what I like to call the modern counter-Enlightenment, which I think was a line of thought that was missed, involving thinkers like a Blondel, Korbowski, Plonier, et cetera, so forth. That I think is quite important. So we've been doing that. I've actually been going down a rabbit hole exploring Deleuze's take on Bergson and his book on Bergsonianism, which is quite fascinating, and trying to get a hold on exactly the function of intuition in Bergson, which is quite interesting as an epistemological tool. So we've been doing that, and I'm also interested in a lot of economic questions. I think there's an interesting economic question on how exactly to price and make sustainable communities like this. I'll talk about the problems of services, goods, and these are kind of like horizons, the ways that you see the world and the horizon by which you take things. How do you have an effective mechanism by which to price or orient and sustain those communities? I find quite curious. So those are some different things. It's a pleasure to be here, and always good to see you fine people. I have to pass it, don't I? Dimitri.
So good to be here. I've recently, I've just started reading Hegel's Science of Logic. And this is, of course, part of the whole philosophy portal project to go back into real and deep thinking and get the right metaphysics. Think about what the relationship between thought and being is, which basically underlies all else of our thinking, whether it's Gerard, whether it's how we see the tech world, whether it's how we see sexuality, spiritual, mystical experiences. So that's just what I've been studying about. And of course, I always embed that in spiritual practices. So I've gone to TNT at the beginning of the year and practiced Tantra in different ways. Now I'm going deeper into psychedelics and also the history of the church. And, in the Netherlands, we have a Brazilian church here. It's called Santo Daime. And they take ayahuasca there. They organize rituals where you take ayahuasca and it's in a explicit religious setting. I think the container they provide is very good. And I see a deep link between that and Christian mysticism. And also the tradition of tantric Christianity, actually, which is a huge tradition that comes up many, many times in the history of Christianity. So that's it for me. I'll pass it on to Alex Ebert.
Can you guys hear me? I'm trying out this new mic. It's okay?
Yeah, it's good.
Sounds nice. I hate to be a broken record. I said this last time. I don't know if there was an audience here last time, but I just think about excess and absence. That's all I think about. That's all I care about. I find that it applies to everything. I'm excited to teach about excess and absence in the Science of Logic course when I moonlight for Cadell. I'm kind of like autistically centered on excess and absence. That's all I got. It's nice to be here.
You want to pass it on to somebody, Alex, or?
All right, sorry. Owen, you haven't gone, right?
No, sure, I can go. Right, strange time at the moment. Like, as Raven mentioned, I've just had her with me this last week, and sparks flying. We spent a few days in Glastonbury getting inspiration for this new project, and we spent a couple of days in the studio as well, working on new microcosmos music, and it's sounding fucking awesome, if I might say so. So I'm pretty excited about that. And actually, one of the main focuses this year is going to be shifting away a bit from podcasting and online events and more into doing artwork and music, I guess, especially, and trying to kind of put on, I think, parties and gatherings in physical space. It's the thing that's really been apparent the last year, is that whenever these collaborations, friendships that have begun online get together in physical space, it's like high intensity, and like a year's work happens in a week. So that's I want to do more of that and be involved in more of that. At the same time, it's like kind of feeling the apocalypse here in Britain, like it's fucking cold, inflation is skyrocketing, and then my boss, the guy I work for, died in a freak accident last week. So it's just like the winter wind blows cold and takes the fucking fruits off the trees. So kind of sitting in this space of intense paradox where there's a lot of new artistic ideas coming, and there's a lot that's dying and kind of crumbling as well. And as ever, the kind of utopian aspirations of our favorite enemy communities seem ridiculous to me. And then kind of on the side, I'm kind of, about 6 months ago, I got this real interest in the works of Mr. Aleister Crowley. And I've been going sort of in both directions with that, going deeper into the Golden Dawn tradition, which is a tradition of like British mystics who trained him, who he then rebelled against, I think. But also like Raven and I found this freaky book by these contemporary like Thelemites while we were in Glastonbury, with just like works that are providing so much inspiration on the dark feminine for the dark Renaissance. They've sort of picked up this character that the Thelemite religion calls Babylon, which is sort of the repressed, intense female libido that has been banished from Judeo-Christian mythology. And they're tracing it back to like the pre-Jewish, pre-Christian Mesopotamian religions, which is interesting given that there's some interest in obviously in Zoroastrianism in our communities. And there's Alexander and that Gnostic informant guy are really researching this quite deeply. So I'm quite interested to talk and explore about this goddess figure, Astarte, Ishtar becomes Aphrodite, and sort of see what happened to that historical lineage with Judeo-Christianity, with the vision to perhaps picking up some more of that for new artworks and new forms of expression, I guess. Like Raven and I would riffing around, like, what would it make to make like a real fucking temple to the patron saint of the prostitute gods? So there we go. That's where I'm at. And who else is there? Just Andrew, right? Andrew's the only one who hasn't gone.
No, you forgot about Thomas.
Yeah, Thomas. Well, Andrew, you go, and then Thomas can go.
Thomas can be last. Okay, well, as I mentioned in at the intro, I'm working on a course quite intensely, and I'm diving deep into symbolism, and correspondences and kind of mythopoetic practices. I'm trained in the Vajrayana tradition of Buddhism, and so I've always approached things from that angle, and now I'm trying to find correspondences to Vajrayana in the West, pardon me, and in the Western esoteric and occult traditions. So, like Owen, I'm kind of. I'm kind of in that world of the occult at the moment, without being an actual practitioner, but exploring the symbolism. And my course is going to try to make it coherent, right, and clear, and just what the fuck all this hidden stuff is, as a kind of counterbalance to, I think, John Vervaeke's series, where he's talking about Socrates and Plato and the Greeks, and it's all very related to the logocentric tradition. I want to explore the Hermetic traditions, which are more visual and have their roots in other cultures. there you go. So that's in a nutshell, what my course is going to be about on May 5th. And I'm totally obsessed with that. And also I'm doing a lot of things at Parallax Sangha to try to get this community functional and healthy. So there you go. That's me. Thomas.
Hello, good evening, everybody. Yeah, I'm a researcher doing machine learning and bioinformatics, and the things that I'm working on right now is first an article on confronting Girard with Nietzsche, which is for the Also Sprach Zarathustra book that comes out of Cadell Last's course on that book. So, and I'm kind of trying to convince people that Nietzsche is maybe not such a let's say that there's some flaws in Nietzsche that many people are just plain ignoring. So that's something I'm working on at the moment, and I'm also getting into something new after 2 years of Girard. I've now read everything he wrote a couple of times, I think. So I need to do something else. And so I'm looking at the research of a kind of neuroscientist called Carl Friston, who has a theory on variational inference on the Bayesian brain. And so I'm reading that. So that's very contemporary. It's basically Bayesian statistics, machine learning applied to the functioning of the brain. And so I'm reading these articles now, and I'm going to make a presentation about that for Cadell's course on the science of logic. And so that's going to be fun, since I'm not really a Hegelian, or I'm not really sure, because I never really quite understand what Hegel is all about, although I'm slowly getting there. But I think that will be interesting to have a conversation on Bayesian statistics, neuroscience, these variational free energy ideas about how the brain works, and to confront that with some philosophy. Yeah, I think that's kind of it for me. I was the last one.
You're the last one, yeah. So Owen, so where do we go from here? A couple of themes are popping up. The one that stands out to me is something the three brains that Alexander spoke about, because I've been thinking about that for years. Gurdjieff also has a three-brain system, which is more, I guess, say, ontological and experimental than probably what Alexander's approach is. So perhaps we could begin with that and see if that sparks any insights from other people. Did you want to talk about that a bit, Alexander?
Yeah, so you can look at it from three different angles. You can look at it from narratology, as we've talked a lot about before. Obviously, I'm working with that, the difference between the logos and the mythos and the pathos. They're constantly mistaken for one another, and that's deeply problematic. It's human beings are creatures that tell a story about ourselves, and we tell these stories through so many different ways. And the easiest way to describe it is logos is fundamentally what we try to do with mathematics and the natural sciences. It's just logical operations, and it has enormous potential and also enormous limitations. And the pathos is the emotional part, obviously, that a machine cannot experience at all or be part of. The pathical, which increasingly the logos becoming machinic, and the pathos becoming increasingly more and more human. The third one, though, is the mythos, which is the only possibility of connecting the other two. So you're sacrificing something by creating a mythos, as Hegel and Lacan would be adamant and agree with. That's called narratology. Now, the funny thing with narratology, it responds to how the human brain is constructed. And this is Gurlian's work with Girard, coming out of Girard, understanding that we could really talk about the brain as three different types of brain. There's the mimetic brain, which women tend to be stronger with. They tend to excel in that. Women and gay guys have stronger mimetic brains than straight men and lesbians do. But the straight man and lesbian are torn between the other two. They're more dominantly emotional. They're more emotional than women are. Women just play emotional. The emotional brain and the logical operations, so they try to rationalize their emotions constantly. That's what men get stuck with. This also explains why men are searching for purpose and meaning all the time, and women couldn't care less. Women are more interested in shoes and dogs. They're better off in that department. I think women are more intelligent than men. The men are really, really, really obsessed with purpose and meaning. So we can explain these things in narratology. We can then explain them further with how the brain operates. And then this winter, of course, I've been really interested in yoga, more theoretically though than practical. All the guys around me are into the practical stuff, but yoga traditionally is also split in three, and it happens to be exactly the same pattern. The bhakti yoga, the devotional yoga, fits perfectly with the pathical narrative, with the pathos. You're devoted to something. Hey, you're emotionally engaged in something. Intuition also belongs in that realm, and pathical narrative, sex, violence, art. It's all in the bhakti yoga. And then, of course, the logical operation is the jnana yoga, which is basically the yoga of knowledge. So this is where you go into what we usually call theory. So you theorize about the world, and you want to know about the world, how the world operates, and obviously the logical operations of the world and all that. And this basically where you're being taught the theory of yoga, and you've been taught things like what is tantra, what is sutra, how do you keep them different, all of that. So when language tries to nail the world, obviously you're doing a jnana yoga. Now the third one though is the karma yoga, which fascinatingly enough is the most misunderstood of the three. Karma in the West is, of course, vulgarly interpreted as something that's individualistic, but nothing in India ever was about individuals. Everything in India is about the community, the Sangha, the Ummah, the congregation, the Anjuman is Zoroastrianism. It's all about the congregation, right? So karma must be understood as when I do the wrong thing, or when I take on a destructive mindset, approach the world with a destructive mindset, I'm causing damage to the entire community. It's not that there's a scale somewhere that if I do evil, then somehow, I'll be punished for it. But if I do good, I'll be rewarded for it. It's not like that at all. None of that exists. That's just vulgar pop religion for children. That's children's stories. But the karma really is mimetic. So the karma yoga can be understood as the way you try to train people to understand how mimetics work, and how, for example, mimetic desire, mimetic rivalry, all those things work. And this is why I insist that the karma yoga is interesting. When the karma yoga goes wrong or is lacking, it's called a lynch mob. If the bhakti yoga goes wrong or is lacking, if you do not submit to your archetype, being devoted to your god or your archetype, then of course that leads to warfare. And when the two are combined, we get the worst of all possible cases, which is civil war, which is a tribe going at war with itself. And I find it very interesting that we try now to rationalize, to try to avoid these things. So we use the third brain to try to rationalize between the other two. I'm going to go deep into this eventually, but just find it interesting as an opener here to understand that the triad is repeated even here as well. And it's repeated in the yoga. So the yogas are the practices. And I think this is the proper Hindu response to Girard's call. Now, how do you control the scapegoat mechanism? It's released with the three yogas. It lies right there. That's what the Indians, they practically try to tame the scapegoat mechanism. And I find it very interesting to make a comparative study. So if the practice is the yoga, then the storytelling is the narratology, and the actual physiological construction in our own brain are the three brains. I'd love to do comparative studies on this.
Can you just repeat the three yogas? I've never heard about it.
Okay, the bhakti yoga is the devotional yoga, which is the pathos. The yoga, we could just call it pathic yoga. The logic yoga is the jnana yoga. That's what I try to do as a philosopher. I try to make sense of the world and put words onto how the world works. I don't write novels. I don't do theater. I'm not doing pornography, although I would love to, but I'm really trying to do logical operations. That's what philosophers try to do in this jnana yoga. The third yoga is the karma yoga. And we never understood karma before because we misunderstand. We talk about karma like, the scales of your actions or whatever. It's childish stupidity you would talk about, which is the way you would explain it to children, right? So I find it interesting to try to understand mimetic desire and mimetic rivalry from the perspective of being karmic. Because I think karma yoga is the attempt in Indian culture, in Buddhist and Hindu culture, to try to tame the scapegoat mechanism by doing a story where you try to tame it, right?
They did it with caste, right?
Sorry?
Caste is the ultimate solution to that in this karmic yoga, with the karmic yoga, no?
No.
No. There are no ultimate solutions anywhere in any.
No, I know,
ever.
but it's a
no. Don't try to do
solution to
anything
this
like
problem.
that. No, there are no solutions to anything. You try to live with the disharmony of the world.
Right,
you
but
try
they
to live with the imbalance
constrain
of
it
the world.
with the caste system.
No. The caste system is deeply feminine in the sense that you are what you were born to be, and everything is a repetition of the same. And what the phallic response to that has been historically to try to invent a class system. A class system is a society where you can move. You can go from one archetype to another archetype, so you can move around. We only have those two options. Marxism has to face the fact that any dream of a society which is flat and everybody's equal ends in absolute terror and horror. We should know that right now. It ends up with Pol Pot. So we either have to go for class or caste. My devoted activism against woke culture today is that the woke culture tries to sidestep the class warfare, the class conflict, instead replacing it, going back to caste. Like if you're a Sami in northern Sweden, you're apparently supposed to raise reindeer forever because your parents did so and your grandparents did so. I mean, that's caste. And we do not want to go back to caste systems. India's getting out of caste system. And the reason they had caste system was it was karmic case in the sense that if it prolonged the peace and avoided the war, then people bought into it if they had no alternative. But the other topic I talked about before, the interactivity we haven't really understood, is now the next phase after caste and class. Interactivity changes the rules completely. It's more important than ever to fight for a meritocracy in this kind of environment. The meritocracy will be established. You know, the data will find you if you're talented in any way. They will find your friends for you. They find the others for you. That's something AI will do very, very easily. You don't have to deal with or settle with the people who live in the village where you're located. You can live anywhere in the world. Space disappears. Everything goes absolutely global if you want to. That's guaranteed to happen with interactivity. So I'm interested now. Interactivity now affects karma yoga and affects mythical storytelling and affects the mimetic brain.
Just a clarification here, because I know something about this. Karma yoga means work, and karma literally means action. So it's not, doesn't mean you're predestined to any situation. It means action. It means doing something. So this is another, new age concept that people have misinterpreted the meaning of karma to be.
I'd be careful. I would advise not to translate karma at all. Any translation you make to the English language of any Persian, Chinese, or Indian term is doomed to fail. You end up in the wrong place. Keep the karma word. Keep the bhakti word. Definitely keep the word for. That's why we keep the word yoga, right, as practice, because otherwise you mix it up with other things. It's nothing. So I would strongly advise to try to keep the term karma yoga and dig into what karma means intuitively with deep studies and everything. And don't just jump to translation and set it's action or something like that, because I would strongly advise to make jump to such conclusions. Keep karma yoga as it is, but start to think of it as relating to the mimetic brain as something the women are very good at to begin with. They're much more karmic than men are in that sense. And then don't jump to caste or class too quickly either. It's not about defending any positions or anything like that at all. The karma yoga is the training of the mimetic brain, and it must include in civilization the training against the destructive part of the mimetic brain, which is mimetic rivalry, leading to scapegoat mechanisms and leading to whatever hell we know. But also, of course, the mimetic brain is how you become a really socially successful human being. We all know that the nerds out there, they destroyed everything for us in Silicon Valley for the last 20 years, are total social misfits. They were lacking mimetic brain capacity. So there's also a problem with not having mimetic brain, which apparently a lot of autistic nerds are lacking desperately. We need it. We need the mimetic brain. We need to understand it better. We need to understand the pros and cons. And I think to study karma yoga in India is a good way to do it, because they practice karma yoga for 3,000 years. They practice the training mimetic brain long before guys like Girard finally came along and started teaching us about this.
What's the relationship between the mimetic brain and the crazy wisdom teacher?
None at all. The crazy wisdom teacher is a tantric teacher you cannot mimic. So the crazy wisdom teacher is at the end game when you're supposed to be a teacher yourself. But you must find your own soul, your own originality, your own archetype, meaning that you can no longer just mimic somebody, because as long as you mimic something, you're just a child, you're not an adult. Children mimic. A proper adultified adult can no longer mimic. And that's exactly why in the tantric realm, a crazy wisdom teacher will behave like a fucking asshole. So there's nothing there for you to mimic. That's the point with crazy wisdom. It does not in itself have anything to do with mimetic brain. It just has to do with stop mimicking. Learn who you are, so you can become a teacher and a mentor. You cannot become a teacher and mentor unless you had a crazy wisdom teacher first, or several of them. I've had several. They piss me off all the time. But my God, the deepest shit I ever learned was outside of books and was directly from crazy wisdom teachers. I guarantee that.
So let's bring some other voices in. How about a Girardian analysis of what's been said? Thomas.
Yeah, I actually recently read about jnana and karma yoga and bhakti yoga. I was in a book edited by Wolfgang Pallaver. You had Wolfgang over for a talk, I think half a year ago or something like that in Parallax, which was very, very good. I think he's in an Austrian university, and there's a chapter in this book. So this book is called Mimetic Theory and World Religions. So it's an edited volume with a lot of contributions. And so there's one chapter called Girard and Hindu Sacrifice. And that analyzes, of course, Hinduism with respect to mimetic desire and with respect to scapegoating. And one of the points that the author of the chapter makes is that Hinduism went from true sacrificial religion, right, killing scapegoats, to something that went beyond that by turning, let's say, the simplistic victimage ritual into this triune split into these three yogas, right, karma yoga, bhakti yoga, and jnana yoga. So knowledge, ritual, so you don't focus anymore on the slaughter of the scapegoat, but on the ritual itself. And then you have the third yoga, which is the devotional yoga. So there's some kind of historical shift from the victimage mechanism to this type of ritual that is not associated with victimage. And that's something that I find very interesting, because, and I've been talking with Owen about that today. Owen is writing a very interesting article for Cadell's book on Nietzsche, on the Dionysian. And so we were discussing the link between ritual and victimage. So does ritual always involve scapegoating? So if you read Girard, then he seems to always use ritual in the context of scapegoating. So and we were talking today about rituals that are still rituals. That is, they might be transgressive, they might involve ecstasy, undifferentiation, breaking of taboos and things like that, but they are not associated with victimage. And I think that this is something that Girard doesn't really talk about. So he really focuses on revealing the scapegoat mechanism, and he kind of seems to equate ritual, and certainly transgressive ritual, with scapegoating. So and what Alexander talked about, so these yogas, that is something that goes in that direction, right? It's the decoupling of victimage and ritual. And then with respect to Hinduism, Buddhism on the one hand, and then Christianity on the other hand, that's also very interesting. There's a very interesting distinction there. It seems that Christianity focused very much on the revelation of the victimage mechanism, right? It's like the effect of rampant desire, which is undifferentiation, rampant conflict, and then killing of scapegoats, right? So that's the focus of Christianity, through the revelation of Christ, which is like the ultimate, the final victim of the scapegoat mechanism, that reveals the mechanism once and for all and makes it ineffective, right? Fantastic revelation of a fantastic religion from my point of view. But then you have Buddhism, and Buddhism has a different take on it. Buddhism focuses much more on desire, not so much on the scapegoating. Although it's also aware of the scapegoating, right? It's also concerned with sacrifice and things like that, but it mostly focuses on the individual and the revelation of let's say the impossibility of desire, and revealing that to the individual. That seems to be the path of Buddhism. So Buddhism and also Hinduism are very much about the individual, the revelation of the nature of desire to the individual, although they don't talk about mimetics. That's not really present in Hinduism or Buddhism. And then on the other hand, you have Christianity that focuses on the victimage mechanism. So they're kind of very nicely complementary. So these are some thoughts.
I'm wondering what OG Rose is, Daniel, pardon me, is thinking at this moment.
OG Rose, Daniel, whatever you want to point, you can just point. That's perfectly fine. Well, always a pleasure to listen to you fine people. Yeah, the debate on the caste is fascinating. There's a book called Caste of the Mind by Mr. Dirk, and he's kind of in a debate with a man named Louis Demond, who wrote Homo Erectus, where Louis Demond wants to argue that you see the caste system sort of arise emergently by people trying to have order. And then what you have is Dirk comes along and he says, well, actually the caste system being a solid system versus say a membrane, which I know is a term that is used, its definition, but it's open, things can come, was made by the British once they controlled the Brahmin class so that they could freeze everything up and control things. So that's a very interesting debate. And also I do like Louis Demond's book on Homo Erectus because it gets into the question of where exactly the human desire to have order and definition can come from, but then the danger of having that become something too solid. Right. And you see that kind of debate between those scholars. So I find that a very fascinating debate. I also very much like the notion of there being different yogas for different part of the brains, that doing the practice for logos is not the same practice as mythos or practice for pathos and different things. And I think, unfortunately, there's something about human beings that like to find what I like to call a monotheory, which is a theory of everything, one practice that's going to address everything, because then we don't have to think so much. Once we figure out what that practice is and we do that, it covers everything. But in fact, you have to have a toolkit of different practices. That's quite lovely. And I like that. And it also makes, you're talking about Hinduism. It does make me think when kind of this idea on this tension between the scapegoat, the ritual, and mimetic and different things. I always find it when you go through the Mahabharata, for example, and what Mr. Bard was saying about karma being more communal, like when you have Karna, which is, he's one of the sons of one of the holy families, the Pandavas, and I can never say the names of the family. I'm from Virginia. I know this is quite difficult. And you have Karna that's going forth, and he's supposedly the born of someone who's doing the boats, and he's of a low caste or a low association. So then Arjuna in the conflict, when they have he won't shoot the bow with him or anything. And then later on, Karna finds out that no, actually his mother is of the high caste, and he would have been worthy to be in that bow match with Arjuna and different things. But then at that point, he actually once Krishna tells him this, he actually keeps that identity secret, and he doesn't tell anyone because of the communal impacts that would have on the war and how things would start to fall apart. And so right there you see an example of someone who has done something just, but that actually has to be weighed within the communal context. And indeed, there seems to be something that can happen when karma can become something very individualistic and it's not located. Like when we see with Arjuna, right? He's constantly in the very famous Bhagavad Gita, he's caught between his duty to his family and his duty to his dharma, the thing that he is supposed to do. And that very tension of itself sort of suggests a way to deal with desire in different things, right? When you actually capture people in various paradoxes or various tensions between an individual and the society and where their loyalties lie and what they're supposed to do, that in of itself can have a corrective function. Which then, if you say, for example, have to move between your different yogas, or you have to weigh different obligations and different things and to take those seriously, that movement from, say, an autonomous structure or a monotheory can actually go in the direction of helping work against the tendencies of the human being to, say, search for a scapegoat, or looking for human beings to, say, put responsibility in other people, because they have to weigh those things upon themselves and figure out how to align with those different things. And I must say, Dr. Hamelryck, I look forward to your call for it. That sounds fascinating. And I picked up the book, The Sacred and the Profane Time, after you mentioned that last time. We were talking about ritual to find that sort of sacred, that fixed space to deal with the problem of continuity and the ability to have something that's going to move beyond relativism and different things, is having that sacred time. That was a fascinating book. So thank you for that suggestion. I did want to mention that. So those are some things that come to mind.
Only can I say, are you talking about Eliad's book?
Yes.
He gets it completely wrong. In fact, I don't know if I can even read the rest of the book. He's completely upside down with regard to the focal point that the religious experience brings. The religious experience actually brings the hierophany that he's talking about, actually brings undifferentiated, non-focused, infinite subjectivism. It does not bring the focal point that organizes relativism. And I just don't think, and this is again comes back to the excess absence. When you have the apophatic moment, you disappear. When you are excessed by experience, when you have that religious experience, all relativity disappears. You become sublimated, in the experience. So anyway, this idea of we need the religion to
Ebert, can I just
the reality
Ebert, you seriously mean that every religious experience ever done among every human has been what you just described? Do you seriously believe this is what I would definitely call a monotheory? I would say there's a whole variety of religious experiences, and there often is. And maybe both you and Eliade are wrong in trying to go for a theory here, but as far as I'm concerned, there are so many different kinds of intense religious experiences in human life. You can't have a theory on just how they should be perceived in only one way. Because then I think you're making the same mistake Eliade just made. You're both making the same mistake by making Europhony one single experience that must be experienced in a certain way and how it works.
Let me put it this way.
Okay.
Let me put it this way.
Yeah.
The second half of what I said is my interpretation of it. If you have an experience that is overwhelming, it is in excess of the limitations of cognition, and you can derive from that what you will. What I derive from that is that the self or orientation is lost in the excess. You are momentarily absented. Now, you interpret that however you want, but yes, I would say that is the definition of any religious experience, and it can be in any variety of any kind. But when you experience yourself in excess, you self-absent because you no longer have, you've met your cognitive limitations. And when you meet your cognitive limitations, a break boundary occurs at which you experience awe. And I would say that awe is the quintessential feature of the religious experience. If it's not awe, it's not the religious experience. It can be something else. It can be a traditional, but it's not a ritual experience.
You are a fanatic. You're a fanatic American individualist romantic, a fanatic one. There are so many different kinds of intense religious experiences. Some of them not even intense. Have you had a child being born? Have you been through that experience, or was it just taking drugs or what? I mean, the different. Yeah, okay, but there are many different experiences.
It wasn't a religious experience.
No, it's not losing yourself because you're an individual in America and finally you're getting out of yourself. That to me is just Bali hocus pocus. Like I go from one guru to the next and I finally lost myself and you're more ego tripping than ever. I mean, listen, can we just offer diversity here instead of saying that that's the religious experience per se? Because I think you're making the same mistake as Eliade does. And
then let me say the ritualistic experience or the experience of awe, whatever you want to call it. Religion is, in your mind, order or societal sort of economics, whatever you want to, whatever your version of it is, but it's not the religious experience. Religion almost has nothing to do with the religious experience. It's a replication of initial ritual called tradition.
No, it's just that you're making a monotheory here that I'm protesting against aggressively. I just think it's a lack of imagination. Listen. The third time you go through the infinite now, for example, around the first time where you're totally overwhelmed, don't know what it is. This sounds like a beginner's experience, what you're describing. The third time you go through it, you're totally cool in the whole experience. It's equally intense and rewarding and religious or whatever. And you just discover that religious experiences, depending on whether you have them or not before, change over time. And that's exactly why the same experience can be intensely dark trauma and it can be intensely light ecstasy, exactly the same experience, depending on the setting, intention, where you come from, etc. There's such a variety of religious experience here that I don't want to go into say that it has to be this way to be a religious experience. I think that's a big mistake. That's all I want to say.
Well, it's certainly not what Eliade claimed. And besides also the profane and the sacred, many people kind of attribute it to Mircea Eliade, but there was actually a very famous anthropologist before Eliade who talked about that, and it was of course Emil Durkheim, and there are quite a few people who think it's quite scandalous that Eliade completely ignores Durkheim, even though he wrote a whole book about it, right? And
you also have Rudolf Otto before that, which you must study if you're going to do Hierophany in these.
Right, but Rudolf Otto is more like Alex Ebert, right? So it's the numinous, the biggest fireworks in my brain, which I think is kind of a very simplistic hipster definition of religion. I think religion has very, very little to do with these types of experiences. I think these are things that are associated with ritual. Ritual is associated with ecstasy, undifferentiation, oneness, transgression, dissolving of sexual identities and other identities, the wearing of masks. All these things are superficial aspects of rituals, and you can take them or leave them to some extent. And so I think that this is all misunderstanding why religion is here and how religion evolved. And I'm kind of deeply skeptical of people who talk about religion and say like religion is like this and religion is like that, if they don't have a clear theory of why we have religion. And this is why for me Girard is a much deeper thinker than Hegel or than Lacan, because Girard has such a theory. And if anybody can give me a better theory than Girard's theory on why we have religion, and I would be very interested in it, but I would be surprised that anybody would come up with something better. So now we know more or less, I think we know why religion is there. And it's basically the transition from animal to human that needed religion, because the difference, if we went from animals to humans, we started doing mimesis. That means we started copying, we went into competition. And because we went into competition, we needed a way to deal with the violence that animals do not have. Animals fight, but they do not kill each other. Humans, because mimetic desire, they compete with each other and they kill each other. That's why we needed religion, because we needed some mechanism to channel this violence and to steer it into a scapegoat. That is religion. And all of these things like undifferentiation, ecstasy, the numinous, Otto and blah, 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 and what Ebert says, all these fireworks in the sky, these are basically superficial aspects. They are not the core issue. That would be the Girardian take on it, and my take.
Do you want to respond, Alex? Because
yeah, it's total bullshit. It's a total misunderstanding of human culture and the development of humanity. The idea that religion developed in response to human violence is utter nonsense unless you define religion as politics. That's it. And I'm sorry, but just because we're in a meaning crisis and it's very fashionable now to return to religion, very hipster, by the way, to think like, oh, religion is actually the answer and we need these focal points and religion was actually what organized society to begin with. Please. But
Ebert, none of us has said any. Who are you talking to?
By the way,
none of us has said any of these things. I started religion since I was 6 years old. I'm not a hipster. I'm not engaged in any of the things.
I think anyone is saying that religion is the answer. We're just getting to the question of what is religion and taking that serious.
Yeah, but my point is,
interesting theory.
That's fine, but my point is responding to Thomas and the idea that the religious experience, I'm not saying the religious experience is 100% antithetical to religion. That's what I'm saying. The religious experience is 100% antithetical to religion. Religion is predicated on tradition, was the replication of ritual. And this is my language. It could be very confusing to you and your own definitions of what religion is.
Oh, it's not confusing. It's just wrong.
Yeah, well, it's like, just take the Santo Daime. This religion has existed for, I think, 130 years, and it exists around ritual time. That's their whole ceremony. You take ayahuasca as the sacrament, you sing about Jesus Christ, you have the hymns. Those are just facts. That's not philosophy anymore.
Yeah, I mean, you're saying what I'm saying, though.
As a tradition and the ritual time with the oneness, the excess, however you want to talk about that.
Yeah, but that's an example of an actual ritual experience upon which religion is predicated. Yeah. Whereas what Thomas is saying is that that's not involved at all.
I say it's not necessary. I don't think you need to trip your brains out to be a very religious person. I don't think you need to have visions to be a very religious person. I think that's completely nonsense. I mean, it's complete misunderstanding of what religion is about. Most people, and actually, it's also very, very kind of it's a nasty way of talking about religion, because if people didn't have these spectacular experiences, right, then you can say, oh, you're not really religious. You didn't see Jesus, right? And then you can kind of say things, okay, you saw Jesus, but you had to take drugs, so that's also not good. So it's kind of like. It's kind of making it very difficult for people to be religious because they need to have these spectacular experiences.
No. Actually, if you want to be, the more religious you are, the less spectacular experiences you have. You understand?
No.
Okay. In other words, you can have your cake and eat it too. If you're religious, you have less religious experience. You understand? Because you're following tradition, not ritual. In fact,
No, this is such a vulgar. You don't
Religion-
understand religion at all, Ebert.
No.
This is
Listen,
absurd.
let me finish it with one sentence.
No, you're like an 11-year-old.
We're scapegoating Alex Ebert.
Yeah, we're scapegoating Alex Ebert here.
We're
Yeah,
getting
listen.
up on Alex. This is not okay.
I think Alex is talking about
This is the New
mysticism.
Year's
let
edition.
me
Yes.
just finish.
Let's all shout at the same time. How about that?
One thing. Religion prohibits new ritual. That
No,
is
it
my
does
point.
not.
Yes, it fucking does.
No, it does not. Christianity
yeah?
may do that, but religion doesn't.
Look at Simon of Trent.
That's ridiculous.
No. Are you kidding? Christianity prohibits a new Christ.
Yeah, but I'm not a Christian. I'm not. I'm a
So
really
what?
deep
We're talking
religious,
about
but I'm not a
religion.
Christian.
So
You
suddenly-
cannot
so
say
suddenly-
such general things.
That's a cheap response. I'm talking Christianity is a religion just like any other, and Christianity prohibits new ritual.
Many religions do exactly the opposite of that.
And those do what I'm saying. But in the case of Christianity, if we're talking about Girard, Christianity prohibits new ritual.
No, but that's how has there then like been different kinds of Christianity? There's Protestantism. There's so many different kinds of Christianity. New rituals.
Dance around the issue all you want, by all means.
All within the history of religion.
I do think there's a truth in what he says, in that like Christianity does kind of go, there was one guy, there was one shamanic guy, and he revealed everything, and then everything's over now.
But that's just reducing Christianity to some kind of, as if it's just like one thing again.
Okay, but we're talking.
Well, I think so. Like if you read, like for example,
a lot
like
of examples of Simon of Trent, for instance, right? You guys all know Simon of Trent, right? Little baby, he was sacrificed. People thought it was the Jews, and they're like, "Oh my God!" And it was the beginning of blood libel. All this stuff is about 1100 in Trent, Italy, right? And he suddenly became revered. And suddenly he was the new figure. He was the new Christ, this 2-year-old boy who had been killed. And it started to spread like wildfire. The Pope had to come in and completely deaden all celebration of Simon of Trent, because it was literally threatening the primacy of Christ.
Hey, listen.
This
If you're
happened
gonna
all
run
the
through,
time.
listen, Ebert. If you're gonna run through thousands of examples, then we don't talk about religion at all. Where did religion start? Probably the shamanic experience. So you were in a tribe, right? You're nomadic. Lasts for hundreds of thousands of years.
Here we
Now,
go.
to go outside of your usual thought patterns, you need to go the shaman. See the shaman. The shaman has a monopoly on outside communication. Shaman talks to strangers. Shaman talks to gods. Shaman talks to demon. Shaman talks to foremother. Shaman talks to forefather. Okay, so shamanic cast is where you go out in the wilderness to see somebody who will then probably put on a very theatrical performance and give you a fucking religious trip if you want that, so you can believe that something extraordinary happened to you, took with you when you go back into the community, right? So I think that's where the religious experience starts. I think Eliad's on to it. I don't know if Otto is on it or not. That's a certain religious experience, and that's religion in a nomadic setting. Now, once we then start organizing larger populations and build permanent settlements and things, then religion develops in different ways and becomes organized religion, because it has to be organized, because everything else, including politics, Carl Schmitt is absolutely right. Politics is theology. Politics is nothing but sort of a form of religion as well, but that's organized religion. But religion is all these things, and the religious experience with the shaman is included, of course, in the concept of religion. Religion is not opposed to it. Not religion.
I absolutely agree with what Bard just said, but I just want to highlight that he said that it begins with this sort of ritualistic or shamanic experience, this excess. And I do think that that is the nativity of the organization of religion, which removes itself through organization away from that ritualistic experience.
Good, but I didn't say it started there. I said it started with the need to communicate with the outside world. You need to talk to your foremother, your forefather. You have to find what archetype you are. You have to fucking save the tribe because it's going into warfare. The hunt failed, whatever it was. You need to go and see the shaman. So 6 years out of 7, we know that we hate the shaman and probably make him a scapegoat and kill him. The 7th year, suddenly, the shaman is the most important character in the entire tribe. This is the tough year. This is the year of the local. So then you go and see the shaman. The shaman then puts on the religious experience for you to believe that something extraordinary happened. So you will believe that he talked to God and gave you his wisdom. I think that's where the religious experience fits in. It fits into a much more theatrical, mythical part of making religion work.
I want to come back here to let's say, sutric religion and tantric religion, because I think that you know, Carl Jung would say that religion was there to prevent you from experiencing God. And I think that you could define sutric religion as that. Whereas the tantric religion is where you break down the barred absolute and you get little experiences gradually over time doing various different practices. So maybe you guys are sort of talking about two different things. I don't know, maybe Thomas is talking about the sutric religion, or you know, religion as, you know, as in the sociological sense, or this, you know, what its purpose is, but then and then Alex is talking about religion in the mystical sense. Or
yeah, I just came back from Qatar, and you could go into these fancy restaurants, you couldn't get alcohol, right? Islam, boring like fuck. Christianity, boring like fuck. The problem with these cults of transparencies, as I've repeatedly said with Islamic Christianity, they are what Ebert talks about when he says religion is opposed to religious experience in many ways. So even if Christianity has its own diversity, it's not at all compared to religion that actually has the split of Tantra Sutra, because the tantric realm there enables you to have intense religious experiences, but they must still be meaningful within the tantric realm. Otherwise, you're just a trip seeker, a kick seeker, and you're a fucking addict. And I don't think any religion ever promoted that. But I think we agree here. Yeah, I think the Tantra Sutra divide solves the whole problem. I think in this case, I can agree with Ebert completely. But then we're talking about tantric religion, and it is religion. It's not something religion is opposed to.
I would just like to ask everyone the question, what is religion? Because it seems like we cannot even get to the basic points. You know, like nobody can agree with each other.
OG, Daniel, I want to bring you in here. What is religion?
Oh gosh, you're going to throw that one at me? Well,
yeah, I'm throwing that one at you.
You know, I did not, we were aiming to have sparks go, so that was enjoyable. And Mr. Ebert, I completely concur with that concern. I suppose maybe the word fixed is not good in the translation. I understood it to be like what he was talking about, a reliable point by which people can return to and actually have a sense of an alternative time than what they are daily engaged with, of which would suggest possibilities beyond the fixedness. So there's a kind of paradox that's going on there where precisely at the quote unquote fixed point, you're actually freed from fixity. That's kind of a way I took it, which I really find quite lovely, because I like so much of kind of the sociologists like Berger and Reef always talk about this tension of givens and releases, how the given in that context is precisely what releases you from the problem of the continuity of time and the continuity of space that he's talking about. So, and that would open up then to mystical possibilities or different things. And then, of course, the problem that you can say, now you could say today, the problem with that fixedness is precisely maybe Deleuzian capture. Maybe you can easily get into like fascism or control and totalitarianism because you know you have that. Whereas today, kind of a challenge is if you don't have that fixedness, you yourself have to put yourself on the practices of the actions you need to do to have a sense of that sacred time, which of course then is less organized, but then it would be less susceptible to various forms of control or falling into closed-mindedness, of which then could lead into something like the banality of evil that Hannah Arendt talked about. So I think that movement is valid that you're pointing at, but I suppose I just took the book to not be reducing religion to a certain sort of like reductionist fixedness. And another way I think about it, just to add to that, I'm always kind of amazed when you say like reread a book, how it's actually entirely different and you see things different in it. And actually like revisiting, you actually find out in that repetition that it's never actually repeating, almost like the difference is there in a kind of Deleuzian sense. And I kind of took a lot of the notion also is this funny way in which repeating a ritual actually can unveil that there's something new there, or say there's a lot of, you mentioned Christianity, there are a lot of parables in Christianity that people have been revisiting for thousands of years and somehow also find something new in it, which would suggest that human beings are not necessarily just bound to understanding things by linearly, that they can always bring in an alternative understanding to then lead to a sense of freedom or liberation from that fixedness. So that was the way I took it. Now that may be a misreading, but that was the way that I understood what the text was saying. On the question of what constitutes religion, I suppose I would get into things like orientations of ultimate concern that have social ramifications in many different areas, if we want to make that independent of, say, mysticism or, say, metaphysics or things like that. For me, religion is going to get into something more sociological, but of course, I agree that there is a vast array of ideas of what would fall into a religious practice and different things like that. And there are dangers of making it too strict, and there are dangers of making it too loose. As we all know, I think it's Latin, religioso, binding, the thing that binds you, of course. Now, the danger is, I think what's happening today is everyone is calling any kind of binding a religion. If it binds you, it is therefore a religion, and you are therefore religious, right? Well, there could be a problem with that. And there also can be a problem with treating religion as simply any sort of belief, and that of which cannot be, say, located in physicality or values or different things. So I think the term has become very open, and it becomes difficult to define. So then one has to ask, are we asking, say, anthropologically? Are we asking in America? Are we asking in the East? Are we asking today? And those things would have to go from there. So it's a very open question. It's a very interesting question. I do think a lot of it, I will say as a comment, I do think a lot of the talk of, say, the meaning crisis or getting back to religion, Mr. Ebert, I have to give you credit. I use it quite a bit, that phrase that the meaning of life is courage. I think that is completely magnificent. And I think, indeed, if we're going to be talking about ways to deal with, say, the meaning crisis or different things, there has to be some element of courage, some element of commitment, some element of trying something. And some of the new sort of notions of religion may not necessarily have that. But that's just my opinion. So those are some thoughts I have.
Maybe we could hear from Raven, who's been very quiet this evening. Do you want to jump in, Raven? And
Oh gosh, this is such a big question. I feel like I'm trying to process all the threads of information that are going through this conversation right now. Yeah, okay. Well, I guess if I was to throw another question out there, the distinction that I'm curious about because of how language is used in the communities that I run in is the distinction between something like religion and spirituality. It seems like there are people who are going down a spiritual path that seems to be connected to religious practice or have some overlap, but yet they don't seem to self-identify in a way that is connected to religion, even people who study religion. So I guess I'm curious if we're going into distinctions and definitions about that use of words, religion versus spirituality. If I could throw it back to Bard and Thomas and Ebert as well about those subjects, yeah.
Religion is for men, spirituality is for women. Does that make sense? I would start there if we don't use those two terms. Yeah, I think it's necessary. Religion. It really is the Nokia slogan, connecting people. It is what ultimately connects people, so they become codependent of each other and can be somehow organized. That's a political ideology is also a form of religion. So religion is the organization eventually. I doubt we can speak about religion in the sense we still talk about nomadic people because by then they have no difference at all. For example, I'm a Zoroastrian. The name of Zoroastrianism in Persian is Mastayasna, which means philosophy. And the East has never had any difference between philosophy and religion. The difference between philosophy and religion was invented by academia in the West in the 17th century. You could have parallel careers without interfering with one another. So a theologian and a philosopher never had to meet anywhere. They could both have titles and get paid or whatever. But it makes no sense in Eastern culture to make a difference between philosophy and religion. Not at all. So if philosophy is just the way you try to organize the world to come to grips with it, then religion is just how you try to organize your tribe and come to grips with your community. And this is what religion, I think, means today. It's just what way do people organize each other to find something meaningful to share? Just to have a flag, religious symbolism, for example. Now, the problem here we got into, and I think Ebert and I eventually arrived at a really good point, is that the Sutric religions that have colored the perception of what religion must be in the West, and the entire idea that Christianity somehow represents all of religion is ridiculous, historically definitely incorrect. Christianity and Islam paid a very high price for being pop religions and go to the masses. They paid the price by becoming cults of transparency and got rid of the Bard Absolute. That means what they did with Tantra was that they just banned it outright. If I can't have a drink in Qatar, well, I can have a drink when I go to Billionaire Villa and they serve me French fucking vintage wines because they're, of course, all hypocrites. They do the tantric practice and they get drunk as much as anybody does when they can afford to, but they're all attempting the public arena to be sutric and therefore not drink at all because that's Tantra and Tantra must be banned. Islam and Christianity have this one thing in common. They banned Tantra outright. They called it sin. That's why I'm against those two religions so aggressively, because I think Tantra is absolutely necessary. It exists in every society anyway. And the question is, how do we deal with these enormous forces that we call the Tantric? You know, if you let sex loose in a society, it breaks down. So why don't you contain it then? Because it's going to be around. What do you do with the drugs? If you throw the drugs on the population, well, I just came back from Southeast Asia where they banned drugs everywhere because 8% of the Thailand population are on methamphetamines at the moment, and it's a massive devastation, just like fentanyl in America. No, you cannot just throw drugs into the open to everybody to share. You must contain them. This is what the Bird Absolute is, and that's called tantric practice. And living, thriving religion does tantra. And the tantra is where the religious experience that Ebert talks about is located, where it can be even more intense when you realize it's not about kick-seeking. So one of the questions we had in the thread was that about trauma. I tell you what, traumatology is how you get out of the bottom where you've arrived. Eventology is how you train yourself to come down from the high you just experienced. And they're identical in the sense that if you stay in the event, you become a fucking kick-seeking drug addict. Or if you stay in the trauma, you become this awful, resentful person who leads to lynch mob and allow yourself to hate everybody who's got more than you have in life. You become what Nietzsche calls the slave morality, and he hates it. So, but the way to get out of the trauma is to lift somebody up out of it, and the way to take somebody down from the ecstatic experience is that, no, you've had enough. Now you come down, baby. And then you can live your everyday life again and go back to that, which is your sutric life, which you must never forget about. But you are allowed to do the tantric, but the tantric can be dark and the tantric can be light. But I don't believe in banning any of these things. This is my critique of Christianity and Islam.
Okay. I would just like to add that there have been many tantric Christian groups in history, like the Borborites, the Carpocratians, Brothers and Sisters of the Free Spirit, and the Neo-Adamites here in Amsterdam.
They were all persecuted by the Catholic Church, and most of them were killed. They were not Christians. You don't get it. They were not Christians. No, they were not Christians at all.
Yes, you can come with.
No, they were not Christians. Not in any meaningful sense that Paul and Augustine and the Catholic Church and Martin Luther have all identified Christianity. These sects you're talking about here, exactly because they persecuted and scapegoated, means Christianity failed at its own mission, which was to stop the scapegoat mechanism. So, no, again, no, you cannot say everything that happened in Europe wasn't Christian, right?
That's all right. You can believe that.
Yeah. Bringing it back to the three brains, I wonder if we could do that, because I think jhana yoga is philosophy, right? Mm-hmm. And that's also religion in the East. I think that's Bard's point. And I wonder if we could talk about karma yoga as being sort of religious actions, and I wonder where the tantra and the sutra fit into those three categories.
Something that comes to my mind just on this one, which is kind of interesting. I thought there's a nice quote from Goethe where he's saying, like, the man who has science and has art has religion, but the man who has neither science nor art needs religion. And it's funny because you look at what he's saying with science and art and sort of think jnana yoga, perhaps even the, what are the other yogas as well? The devotional yoga. So the man who's trained and who's trained his emotions can exist in a kind of religious state. But the man who hasn't trained his mind and hasn't trained his emotions still needs a kind of religious state. And that actually speaks to this sutric and tantric layer. Like, not everybody has access to the sophisticated practices of yoga. It's kind of often an elite practice, but then there's the sort of simpler version that I guess Goethe is saying that people need, which is a way of perhaps training your mind, training your emotions. For, like, you forget, like, the majority of people throughout history are fucking peasants with no access to education. And
but my point here is this, where the karma yoga comes in. You just describe your own personal trip, your own self-obsession. If that would be religion, and then you could do science and art, don't need religion. Religion then forces you to go back into your community. It's your role within your community, the archetypology of the community, which is religion. So you can sit there and trip on your own fucking ego as much as I like and be a fucking pillar saint for all I care. You're not very religious. Religious means you're engaged in your community. You cannot do tantra without the sutra. This is the karma yoga. The karma yoga is the communal aspect of the yoga. It's the yoga where you go away from your own rational brain. You go away from your own emotional brain. Go into the mimetic brain. That's more on the feminine side. It forces you back into the community, because karma is not your actions on how the yoga. It's how the community is doing. Whether the community survives you, or whether it goes down with you. Whether you're a destructive part of your community or a constructive member of your community. This is the karma yoga. It definitely has to do with mimetic somatic brain. So get out of the fucking big trip of who you are, your own spirituality, and go down into the community. That's where you find true religion. And that's why karma yoga is the most religious of the three yogas.
Yeah. There's a nice way to look at this as well, which provides ways of like thinking about these whole ideas of reincarnation. Like if you think that I'm born in a world where there are people who have desires that existed before I was born and I picked those up, then actually people might die, but the desires themselves live intergenerationally. The mimetic networks live intergenerationally. And so it provides a way of interpreting this idea that communities can become cursed or communities can become sacred. What it means is that there's been a whole load of fucking awful shit that's happened, and people have picked up some really nasty demons inside of their head, nasty projections, nasty ways of relating to one another that then they're passing on because they don't know any better. I mean, I think our culture is still fucking battling with the shit that got unleashed with the world wars and the nukes, really. There's still messed up desiring relationships because of that. And that would be the task of karma yoga at the moment, is cleaning out the communities, like Bard says.
Yeah, you know me.
The same as the Asha in Zoroastrianism, or is that something different?
No. These yogas follow Zoroastrianism too. They're identical, but they're different practices. So they're different practices you do within the Asha is just a general principle, how the world works, same as Tao in Taoism, identical to that principle. Ashravan is a person who devotes himself to following Asha, to stay with the Asha. I mean, basically having a scientific approach to reality and stay with the facts. That's where you start from. And then on top of that, go artistic. And on top of that, contribute in what way you can contribute to archetype. Now, if you completely contribute with your archetype in the community, you're an Ashravan. If you're a Bedin, you're a member of the community. Those are the terms we use. The yogas are just the practices. So I would say it's rather like this. If you have a strong mimetic brain, you can focus less on the karma yoga, and you have to practice more on the bhakti yoga and jnana yoga. If you're good with the theory of jnana yoga, you better also practice with the bhakti yoga and the karma yoga, while also keeping in mind you should be an expert of one of the three, because your archetype is probably closer to one of the three than the other two. And therefore, you should love and admire and respect the members of the community that are good at the yogas where you fail. This is the love of the community. This is what every religion that creates a strong sense of community is trying to do, to try to create these archetypes. And you do what you're good at the community, and that's how you contribute. Even if you're just cooking the coffee, fine. Find your archetype, contribute to the community. That's what it means to be religious, right?
And the bhakti yoga, is that associated with would you say, art and pathos and the feeling realm?
Yeah, it makes so much sense when you understand it. If we've gone into narratology the last few years, when you suddenly realize the three yogas are, of course, perfectly matching. They've been developed over thousands of years. So they would reflect the archetypes and they would reflect the three brains, since we do have these three brains. And of course, the bhakti yoga is the pathos. So this is the sex, the violence, the art, the dark renaissance, the fuck ups in life, the real. When the real comes in and destroys your symbolic order you created with your rational brain, or the imaginary order you created with your mimetic brain, then suddenly the real comes in and destroys them. You have to rebuild your fantasies about the world all over again. This is the real in Lacan. That is the bhakti. This is the bhakti yoga, devotion. I'm totally passionate about this. I want to do everything I can to submit to this and go all in for it. Truth as an act lies precisely there. When I identify with my act and I thought, I don't care whether I'm right or wrong, I'm just going to do it. And I'm going to totally identify with doing it. Truth as an act. That's pathical. That's the bhakti yoga. You train yourself to submit yourself to your own desire, completely go into it.
I just want to point out that obviously this is we all know this, but whatever, it's worth remembering, and I put it in the chat that religion is from religar, to bind. It has everything to do with the intersubjective binding, and I guess one way to maybe try and tether the two sort of poles is that the spiritual is I think both the religious experience in the context of binding and intersubjectivity, and then the spiritual experience in the context of binding the individual to the universe or to God. There's a one to God and a one to many. Both require the limitation of the tribe, and or the limitation of subjectivity. And in the context of the religious experience, we could call it, in the intersubjectivity, the accessing of the moment in church when we're all singing together, or the moment here when we all feel like we're together. There's some sort of intersubjective binding going on. We could call that a religious experience, whereas the spiritual experience is more individualistic, of course, but it's the one to all as opposed to the one to many, or the one to the occluded many, like the tribe or whatever, and the various limitations there. Anyway, Bard, you're shaking your head. Disagree?
Yeah, because you take God as separate from the community.
Okay, but
the community is God.
Okay, but that's semantics.
Even in Christianity, that's the case. God is the community. God is you're not an individual talking to an old man on a cloud. That's
in the case of religion, yes. In the case of religion, yes. But in the case of spirituality, which is individualistic.
No, it's not. Only in California.
Okay, but we're talking
only in California. Nowhere else in the world but California.
Is spirituality not Californian anywhere?
It is the whole idea that I'm an individual on a kick. You're talking about having a kick. You're not talking about religion. You're talking about having a kick, a trip, and having a kick and being Californian individualist. Individualism is a California religion that the rest of history has never cared about. You're alone with that experience. Alone with God. Hey, how about integration after your fucking religious experience? What are you going to do during integration? About integrating yourself into the community to see what you can do with your experience inside the community. And in what way you can be more helpful to the community because of your experience. Otherwise, you've just been on a fucking trip like any heroin addict. And there's nothing more to it than that. And it's not spiritual. It's not spiritual.
Blown away.
It's judged by its integration. The experience is not judged by how high you were. It's judged by
I get it. But what I'm saying is the religious experience I'm proposing is pre-integrated because it's intersubjective. It's already with the community. It's what you want. It's the pre-integrated sort of experience, whereas the spiritual experience is usually one to all and needs to be integrated or processed in some sense communally and requires set and setting and a bunch of
the 3 steps. There's an intention. And when you do the intention, it's not what's going to happen. But you have an intention. You know why you're there and why you're doing it. And you're not kick-seeking. And you're not sitting there reveling on your misery or anything like that either. You got to clean that up before you do the religious experience. Otherwise, it's not a religious experience at all. You're just taking a heroin trip and nothing else. Then after that, there's a ceremony. And it takes off in a whole new direction. And it teaches you cannot control the world. And the world is not harmonious or balanced, pathos again. Then after that, you need to integrate it. And the integration is all about, okay, so how am I transformed? How am I transformed as a contributor to my community? It's not about you. Nothing ever in religion is about you. And if you think spiritual experience is about you, you're nothing but a banal trip seeker, pick seeker. You're nothing else. You haven't even understood religion. Seriously. You're just another transformation bitch who's gone to Bali, met another guru and did a drug. And the next weekend, another guru gave her another drug. That's not fucking spirituality. That's just
okay. But that's anyway, I'm trying to differentiate spirituality from religious because that was Raven's question. Anyway, religion is intersubjective orientation. Spirituality is subjective orientation. That's what I would say. I'll leave it at that. There is a difference, at least rhetorically.
Actually, no. Here's the thing. If women are more spirituality than men are, spirituality is on the side of mimetic brain. Spirituality is even more about community and the shared experience. And when I sat down with women who did, for example, psychic experience together, their integration is all about how to find community and unity between each other afterwards. And the whole idea for them taking on the strong experience was to find a shared community with sisters. They're better at that than men are. Mimetic is incredibly important to women. So if anything, if we say spirituality is for women and religion is for men, religion is because men need to be organized, otherwise they're just fuck-ups. Women naturally take to spirituality exactly to then go social with it. It's all about mimetics.
The word for Holy Spirit in Hebrew is Shashina.
I don't know if Raven has to say here. Maybe she will kill me. But I would say that if we think of spirituality as more on the feminine side and religion is the more masculine, then definitely spirituality is more mimetic. And that's when spirituality goes wrong, we get the lynch mob. When religion goes wrong, we get war. When spirituality goes wrong, we get the lynch mob. It's the dark feminine.
Yeah, I was just a little footnote because I find it interesting that spirit is feminine in Hebrew and the Shashina is the Holy Spirit, which is that is what brings you close to God or in that particular religion. Without that, they say that without the Shashina, there's nothing, anyway. So have we come full circle here? We've done an hour and a half. Does anybody have any like urgent final things to say? Maybe we can ask. Maybe Owen, are you still there? Do you want to field the questions from? We have a bit of an audience here. Now, Owen's off somewhere. Anybody have something like some final?
Aaron had a fantastic question. Can we start with that one?
Sure.
But in my very rudimentary understanding for classic Hindu religions, Western religion actually doesn't have God in the community. They act for God or are moved by God, whereas religions like Tantra, they actually do see all things as God. Well, number one, God is very often used in Christianity, but very rarely used in other religions. So just get off the sort of Eurocentric perspective here that God is very important. The word God is just a name for something we usually, phallic God is just something we put in the future, like a shared goal we go towards. So the promised land, for example, is God. It's something like that. God is just a replacement word we put on the highest or the absolute or something we strive for. And in religion, that is the community itself. In Christianity, it's called the congregation or the Holy Spirit. Christ says it when he says that when I'm gone, you will experience me as soon as two of you are together. It's the marriage between Christ and the bride of Christ in the New Testament. The bride of Christ is the congregation, represented by the number 4. Trinity is 3, 7 together, congregation. So the Ummah, Islam, same thing. The Sangha, Buddhism, the same thing. The Anjuman in Zoroastrianism, the same thing. All major religions are totally focused on the congregation and the divine life in the congregation itself. God is just a replacement word for that. And the idea that you as a person, individual, have a personal relationship with God is complete falsehood made up by Martin Luther because people started reading books on their own in the 17th century in Europe. The rest of the world never cared about it. It got us all on the wrong path. And if we do have a Western meaning crisis, it's due to individualism, the idea that there's a personal relationship with God. No, you never have a direct personal relationship with God at all. You have indirect relationships with God through the community. The community and God are one.
Maybe Aaron, if you're there, you could follow up if you wanted to, so we could hear your voice. Or just.
Oh, okay, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, cool. No, that no, it makes sense, and I guess it always. Not that I feel like there's great love for tantrics here in the group. I'm kidding. It always, I guess, comes back to, and I don't know why. I think it was it was Andrew or Alexander. Sorry, Bart. When he said, God is in the community. I just find, and this may just be my own experience, that in Western type religions or dualist traditions that, again, I could have said universal instead of God, of course. But there is that distinction in these religious communities where God is actually something other than, where in religions like Tantra, the universal, there is no separation between Purusha and Prakriti and all that stuff. So I guess it hung me up for some reason, but what was stated completely makes sense. So thank you.
So does anybody else want to jump in with some questions here?
No, we scared them all.
We scared them all away. We have a big crowd here, but nobody wants to ask a question.
Quinn does.
Oh, excellent. Go for it, Quinn.
Yeah, good stuff. This was fun. I'm curious, Ebert, in the chat, you said that sort of the reenactment of the ritual has something to do with religion, but that is the removal, I think you said, or something like that, of the mystical experience. And I guess I'm curious about this because I would think that any kind of collective ritual would require some sort of repetition, maybe some sort of minimal difference to some chaos, some of the Dionysian, but it would require some of the Apollonian, some of the repetition in order to be practiced again and not just be a kind of solipsistic and individual one-off experience. And so
Yeah,
I guess
mean,
my question is, yes, yeah, repetition, sameness versus the element of difference, and how to think.
I mean, if we're going to be, I think Deleuze is a little off, but I do like the notion that pure repetition is pure difference. But putting that just aside for a moment, pure repetition is the premise of the brand. It's also the premise of eternalization. Media is there to be put on a wall to persist from one moment to the next in its same static form across time. So the repetition, the redundancy across time is necessary for identification. Identity itself is repetition across time. So when we talk about a religion and the binding is required, the binding requires brand. Essentially, what we're talking about is brand loyalty, and brand is the repetition of an image or a concept, whatever it is, across time. The same thing. So pure difference in the Deleuzian sense, to address your, the notion of difference. But that's sort of a red herring, because it's, the only difference is the temporal location of the repetition. So I don't know if that addresses your question, but yeah, you have a follow-up, maybe? I'm a little drunk.
Yeah, no, I mean, I guess it seems like a certain flavor of repetition in the brand form leads to maybe a death of the thing, because it doesn't change. But then also you so maybe, yeah, what type of
let me add something
must you bring to the repetition in order for it to evolve would seem to be the question for the religious collective system that's trying to change and not calcify, maybe.
In some sense, nothing, right? If we're going to be Hegelian, all you need is time. And that the pure difference across time, the pure repetition, and the only difference is the temporal difference across time, but it's pure repetition, 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 has its own limit. And that limit, let's say, is boredom, right? Suddenly we're just like, you know what, fuck this. This is like too much equilibrium, too much static across time. We're going to change. So in a lot of ways, like my initial response or my provocation would be like, what we're doing here as philosophers is sort of like topical. A lot of this stuff is running automatically. And our rebellion has its own limitations, which are prompted by these sort of limitations of redundancy. So in some sense, nothing. In another sense, as soon as you're feeling like being provocative, you've already reached your threshold, and you start to fucking with the paradigm and fucking up that difference and modulating it, or whatever the case is, and religion starts to change because little thresholds, which are sort of imperceptible, are being reached vis-a-vis boredom, or whatever the case is, vis-a-vis these redundancies across time. Yeah, I mean, in some ways, that's what we're doing here, is getting tired of equilibriums, philosophical equilibriums, whatever the case is.
I agree. I would say the shaman is clearly a psychotic character. So you go to see the shaman to shake yourself up. And once that happened, of course, once you go back into the tribe, everybody gets nervous about you being psychotic from that experience. And they try to calm you down, and neurotics take over. And when the neurotics take over, that's one thing they love: repetition. Repetition of exactly the same, exactly like we did last year. Must not change anything. And that eventually kills religion. You can just go and look at, say, people who are tripping on Christianity, say the Protestants who do Pentecostal Christians, and, they want to do the speaking in tongues or whatever they compensate for because they don't take drugs. So they do these kind of trippy things, and they kick seekers like that. Whenever their churches get boring, they just start a new church. Well, they move somewhere else and start another church, and then they go more hysterical for a while and trip on that until that's boring, and they go on to the next one. So it's really the move between the psychotic and neurotic, which in itself is, of course, a certain repetition, but at least, once you get bored with something, you need to go into something new. But there's also another axis to that, and that is that the material world in which you live can radically change. That, for example, is a paradigm shift. For example, here we're sitting with new technologies that exist 30 years ago. Obviously, this will influence religion. This is what I call the reformation of religion. Religion is constantly reformed, but it's not only reformed because we're bored, because then we probably go back to the same place again between psychosis and neurosis. It's rather reformed because this is a new time. Religion now has to go and be with laptops and smartphones, otherwise it becomes totally irrelevant. And this is Zoroaster's case when he reformed paganism. He said he didn't kill paganism. He let people believe what they want. But here's a new elite religion according to which you're going to organize a fucking empire. And that was his idea. And it succeeded for 2,200 years. That's why I got interested in him. He was just a reformer. And I think religion is religion, period. You can just reform it. And the reformation shouldn't be about the boredom factor. It should be about, is this a new paradigm we live in that requires an entirely different approach towards organizing people to make their shared intersubjective experience meaningful?
Yeah, and that's the automatic sort of time as difference, where the temporal changes actually just elicit naturally at a certain limit a reformation.
I see Ronald in the house and with his camera on. Ronald, did you have a question? It's great to see you, by the way.
Yeah, thank you. So it's not really a question. It's more like a bunch of observation and hearing and penetration that I got from the talk. So I may share just a little bit of that. So just to go back to the three brain theory, like the three brain theory, when you talk about the mimetic desire, there's something that struck me about that, because it reminded me, you know, in psychoanalysis, you have this concept where, you know, the children is the primary fetishist, meaning that he sees everything in destroy object or little objects. And when you talk about, you know, the autistic people that are lacking this mimetic brain to sort of build kind of technology of things that would like that makes the world the way it is right now. So I just thought about this concept, and in many literature work that I've been observing, there is this interesting remark about losing your ability. So when you talk about this sort of autistic way of being, it's more like one of the definitions of craziness that they found is when you lose everything, sensibility, poetry, language, and the only thing you have left is this systematic language that runs in circle. And when you are no longer able to connect with anything. And I found this idea of craziness very interesting because it blocks the mimetic power. You know, it's sort of like becoming an erudite or pedantic or a sort of person lost in its own jargon and its own world and become completely disconnected and being unable to be bound to anything. And in an analysis about religion and aesthetics, there's been this, I think it was Roger Scruton, who wrote a book about aesthetic and culture. And in one of them, he talked about how religion also shape and give a direction to aesthetic, meaning how people should feel about life. And I like this idea because it sort of tells you the idea that within religion or within the experience or the mimetic brain, there is this orientation that you decide to have toward life. And it's a very complex question because you have to break down too many things. So we talk about media and drugs and stuff like that. There is like from Friedrich Kittler, like the media theorist, he had this very interesting talk about how the media shapes your own discovery of ontological self. So I will connect that just to religion, or rather to how we connect together. Basically, now that we have more visual technology, hearing technology, and that we no longer have to rely on literature to be the all five senses grasping to discover ourselves, we are less able to necessarily know ourselves or alphabetize our own being as well, because we don't have the same proficiency to the tool. And as such, we have a harder time to discover ourselves. So it's kind of like the aesthetic of the kitsch, the simplicity, the memes, the image that come back, that sort of destroy the language and the ability to be. So it's a very complex, multi-layered question. And that's also why, you know, the concept of spirituality and religion gets complicated, because since all the media are moving, the way of being are moving, the ontological self is reshaped by all those interactions. You have to move around and find a way that gives a real community and not a fake or a pretending to be community that tends to be created in the modern society. So we have a lot of it's kind of like a ready-made fake concept of community that use fake language, fake way of being. It's the false consciousness that you find, since Marx, that talk about with like Adorno and all of that, the pseudo-identity that people take. So it's really fighting against that false demon that gives you this false being, this false way of talking. And as such, you cannot connect. And you will become more and more this schizoidal, fetishist in a way. So yeah, it's just some remark that came from that point. Yeah.
That's cool. I just comment on that really briefly. The siloed communities of the internet, of course, are insane in a certain sense. The infinite self-relation of information and social norms that occur within limitations that refuse to sort of extend the interiority to an external view, to have sort of cross-domain communication, who lack consilience, is of course the whole premise of the meaning crisis, these idea of these siloed, insanities. And yet, on the flip side, there's a positive, because these siloed, self-relating societies are themselves prototypically, as we've agreed to, religious. They're self-binding. And so there's a great sort of reformation, but in the sort of actual dictionary sort of sense, a reformation of religious affiliation that at the moment is isolated and siloed, but that's a necessary piece of the process in order to create internal cohesion before looking externally. So anyway, that's my comment there.
Hugo, do you have a question?
Yes, I have a question to Alexander Bard regarding Sweden. I think you talked about this on a podcast with a Swedish guy called Navid Moderi before. You talked about how people in the tech sector leave Sweden due to being too kind of drudged into the old paradigm. So I was thinking, what do you think is the future of Sweden in this regard? Do you think like more people are going to leave Sweden for these reasons, or do you think that the new parties are going to be able to turn it around? Yeah.
Oh, okay. It's a different question. The studies I'm doing right now are in places like Dubai and Singapore, because I think they herald mass movement of digital nomads. But the real radical break with the internet, I talked about interactivity. I'm interested in interactivity. We haven't even begun to think interactivity yet, I think. It dissolves space. We now live in a world of the calendar. We live in the world of a schedule. We live in a world according to time. We know we're going to die one day. We sort of speculated, what am I going to do until the day I die? And what's going to be meaningful for me? What kind of community can I create? I think that's got to be a question that moves into the middle classes quite quickly. It will definitely affect how they perceive religion and spirituality on a larger scale. But I think being less tied to your Heideggerian Heimat, to a specific place on the planet, means you're going back to nomadism. But in this case, nomadism is really going to be the elite who practice it first. And that's why I'm interested in projects like Prospera in Roatan, Honduras, Bitcoin communities, things like that too. They're more radical, of course, than Dubai and Singapore. But Dubai and Singapore offers us a possibility to study something where millions of people are moving already, becoming incredibly wealthy, becoming intensely successful, and get exactly what they want. Warm climate, big airport, can go anywhere I like in the world. Wi-Fi works wonderfully. I can do whatever I like here. And I think this sort of old nation state is going to find it really hard. I think America's going to find it hard. There's even people in Texas who want to leave America already. And I think things like that's going to happen over the next 50 years. I think the death of the European empire is really the death of Russia at the moment as well. I think these large systems are failing. And city-states and smaller communities win because we already have a global empire. It's called technology. Technology has gone global. Human beings can't and won't. We will go local. But thinking technology is global and human beings as local helps us understand where we're heading next. And as far as Sweden is concerned, it depends on policy, it depends on the government, it depends on education, it depends on tax rates. Is Sweden still an attractive place for people to go to start a company and do tech? We'll see. Europe is a bit slow because it's getting old. You know, we'll see where that goes.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else have we maybe could have time for one or two questions, and then I want to tell everybody who's still here that we have something called a wonder room where people can go after and have a drink and keep going and talk with each other. If you feel like sticking around and having a conversation. So so somebody will put the wonder room link in the chat. So we'll maybe try to aim to end around 10 if there are final, you know, maybe we could go do a quick final checkout with everybody in the you know, who was invited here today. Can we do that? So we'll start again, well, you know, with where we began with Raven.
Well, this has been great. I love seeing the sparks fly and getting drunk with all of you. Yeah, I'm just excited for this year. I think it's going to be amazing. The retreats so far that we have planned, I think, are going to be fiery as hell. Dimitri and I are going to go do psychedelics at this church in the Netherlands. So there's like a lot going on. And I think this conversation is part of the course that we're setting for this year, which is exciting. The antagonisms are great. And I guess we'll see. Do we figure out religion this year? Maybe we will, maybe we won't. So I think for me, I'm really going into practice, like as much as I possibly can, and trying to base theory and root it in experience, and try to avoid the many traps that I can see people fall into, especially with hedonism and just getting a fix. I want to get beyond the fix. I think sometimes I'm just looking for a fix. So it's time to kind of elevate beyond that. So I've been thinking about that throughout this conversation. So I appreciate hearing from everyone and the wisdom here. So to many more. Thanks for putting this together, Andrew.
Pleasure. Do you want to pass it on to somebody?
Yeah, I want to hear from Thomas.
All right. You'll hear from me. Yeah. Well, I mean, there were a lot of cliches tonight, right? I mean, the scapegoating of Christianity, you know, Christianity is a pop religion, blah, 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 blah. I mean, this is like a fantastic revelation of the victimage mechanism. I mean, calling Christianity a pop religion and minimizing the accomplishments of this religion is just as ridiculous as calling Buddhism a pop religion. I mean, nothing of this makes any sense. So another cliche. Then we had the cliche of Alex Ebert. Now, religion is about like these big experiences. I took a lot of acid and I saw God. I mean, seriously, I mean, we can do better than that, right? So what is really missing here is that people talk about religion and they have no theory about religion. Why do we have religion? You don't have any theory about religion. You just focus on the phenomenology of religion. You know, I had a religious experience on acid. I see people behaving like this, and then suddenly that's religion, and you talk about that, right? Religion is about the religare, another cliche. I mean, religion is about bringing people together. I mean, seriously, have we kind of like taking things out of the big cliche basket here tonight, or what? I mean, there are theories that say like, this is why we have religion. And that's where we should start, right? This is why we have religion. If you can't tell us why it's there, you know, why do we have it there? I mean, then it kind of just, it becomes very descriptive, and it's very much about like, I had an experience and this is very universal. So that's what's missing. This is what Girard has. Now, and I keep hammering on this. If you come up with a better theory about religion, about why we have religion, right? Tell me about it and convince me. Send me the books, send me the articles, send me the anthropology, and I'll read it. I'll spend 2 years reading everything if I think it's interesting, right? But as long as you don't have that, then all of this stuff like, you know, like Like I think it's about religare, about bringing people together. I think it's about having big experiences. I think it's about experiencing God. That always assumes one thing, that the human that has a religion is already there. You already assume that the human is there. The culture is there. And that is your problem. You have to explain, why was there an animal, and why did the animal become a human, and what's the role of language and religion in that transition? That is the big question, and that needs to be addressed. And as long as you don't address that, then it's very much window dressing and kind of personal experiences and a lot of Hegelian gobbledygook that nobody understands.
I would like to go after
Thomas
that.
is in his element. Okay, no, pass it on to somebody, Thomas.
So yeah, I'll go after that. So Thomas, I agree with your points, and I think that there's many presuppositions about religion does this. I feel about this in religion. So at first we have to get rid of these presuppositions, right? And Girard has one monotheory about why religion is such a necessity. I'm not sure, like on Hegel's view or Lacan's view on religion, but I think it's worth studying these traditions more deeply and really be humble about this, you know, and step back and ask the question: what is religion? Like, what is religion as an evolutionary phenomenon? So, as you explained, the human being has emerged out of animals. Religion has had an evolutionary function. What is the role of religion in that sense? Also, in the mystical sense and certain other philosophical senses, we can ask the question of theological questions like what's God and stuff like this. But yeah, I think definitely it's time to take a step back and stop shouting presuppositions and really ask the deep questions and go back studying. So maybe we need some Hegelian gobbledygook for that. Anyway, look forward to seeing you in the Science of Logic course. I'll pass it on to the Bardo, Mrs. Bard.
Oh, I'm supposed to say something. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, actually, this conversation tonight never had a topic, Thomas. We didn't decide we were going to discuss religion in the first place. So yeah, if you think we should have gone deeper on religion, then you should have yourself. It's as easy as that. It was a very open conversation. I've enjoyed it very much, and certainly I'm looking forward to do my version of religion with Ebert, and certainly take tons of drugs and go through a really probably traumatic experience, and then try to deal with that integration, and certainly go back to shamanic religion, which is one of many versions of doing religion. So yeah, I would rather ask this question: is there anything outside religion? I don't think there is. The book I'm writing right now, 1,400 pages thick, starts with these words: everything is religion. And whatever thinks it's not religious is the really dangerous shit that's going on. Everything is religion.
Oh, I'm going to jump in. I agree. Everything is religion. Which point, though Thomas is nodding, negates Thomas's point. Everything is religion, not just religion. Politics, social hierarchy, all of it. Economics. So the problem with Thomas is, what are you doing, Thomas? Are you writing in chat?
Well, I mean, I can't write on chat anymore.
I like you as my arch nemesis a lot. But anyway, this has been really fun. And I look forward to more of this with increasing frequency if we want to be Hegelian. So, you know, the more we argue, the more likelihood we have of reaching some random sublation point whereupon our argumentation collapses into something that we would become rapidly bored by, but which would nevertheless produce itself as IDW's thought. And I think the more we do this, and then of course we'd have to employ self-relating negation. Dimitri, you and I will discuss at some point my beef with your version of self-relating negation, but at some point then we will produce something that we will become completely antithetical to and bored by and have to move on from. But I like the idea that we continue this process. My only critique would be that we haven't figured out the algorithm for the frequency of it, or something, so that there is a collapse that begins to occur. We've been sort of judicial in our temporal argumentation, and I look forward to more of it. Cheers, y'all.
How about Daniel Gardner?
Well, this has been a pleasure. Always a delight to listen to everyone. And no, I think there's this pretty radical tension where, just on the themes, if we use the language of spirituality and religion, where there's a danger in reducing spirituality, religion, or reducing religion to spirituality, and yet they seem inseparable. So there's this certain irreducibility, but there's also this need for one another. And I think it's just sort of a case study of some of these problems if we mention American Christianity. So one of the fastest growing denominations of Christianity, starting about in 2010, was Pentecostalism, because there's a real move against the rigid religiosity of conservative Christianity and so on and so forth. So everyone became very Pentecostal. Well, now there's a problem where some of that lack of a structure of the Pentecostal has led to a lot of fragmenting and going apart, and also, unfortunately, a lot of extremism has grown in those different groups, right? So if you don't have the container, and then it's very interesting because a lot of American Christians will make a point to say, I believe in Jesus, I'm not religious, as if religion is bad. Right? Well, you take that too far, and then you don't have a container and you get all these different problems, right? And then, of course, if you have a religion that doesn't have some sort of spiritual dimension, it doesn't have authority, right? It has to have, point to this dimension of it that is beyond the religion to derive its authority from, and make some sort of claim that through this religion, you can uniquely approach and participate in that spirituality. But then it always has the temptation to reduce the spirituality to that religion, or bring it to its fold, and then it dies. Or then you can just remove the religion and have the pure spirituality, but then you have no communal bonding, right? No way to have it participate in the community or be organized. So it's a very difficult tension. I really like all the sociologists on it. I mentioned Berger, I mentioned Reef, I mentioned Hunter, and all these different people, and they bring in a part of the conversation I think is very important. And the last thing I'll say is I do like where Mr. Sweeny was talking about the spirit, and I think Mr. Mortimer will talk about spirit as meaning Ra. I think it's R-A-H-I or something. That means breath. And so spirit is the animating principle, right? Well, if you have a body and nothing animates it, it's dead. But if you have breath and no body to animate, then it just kind of wisps away. So there's quite a difficult tension that has to be worked through on these things. And it's a pleasure to speak with all you fine people to perhaps go about doing that. So it's a pleasure. Owen, Mr. Sweeny, who would like?
Yeah, I'll go. I mean, I guess my last thought is more or less what I wrote in the chat, and goes back to what I said at the start, that I'm interested in the deep roots of Judeo-Christianity, in particular the figures that it's locked out or shunned. And this idea that I've been playing with that kind of synthesizes a bit of Girard with some of Bard is that their culture seems to, at least according to Girard, have emerged with these violent scapegoating rituals where someone was killed, but it unified the community. But then over time, we seem to have figures who work out how to unify the community with rituals that don't necessarily need to have some kind of murderous victim present. They might be present, like you can have Aztec temples by all means, but you can also have crazy artistic rituals or crazy psychedelic ceremonies or whatever. But these, if they work, always involve some kind of confrontation with death and identity destruction or transformation. So there's still that element of being on the edge there. What seems to happen with Judeo-Christianity, and certainly with Christianity, there's kind of an idea that we had the last guy, the last show, and the name was Christ. And since then, anybody else who's kind of going into that space gets associated with this evil figure of Lucifer, who's fallen out of heaven and he's the devil. But no other religion has this fascination with some kind of devil or Lucifer figure. And actually, the esoteric side of Christianity, the artist, whether it's Milton or whether it's Crowley or whether it's John Dee or whoever, people are always interested in this Lucifer character, Blake. Lightbringer is what it means in Latin. And I guess I'm kind of curious that actually the resurgent interest in Lucifer in the 20th century ties in quite nicely with the project that we're calling the reemergence of tantric religion. And it's actually a kind of return to this idea of the shamanic figure as substituted or sublated scapegoat who's able to create some kind of interesting ritual that transforms the community or changes something. And not shunning such figures, but actually welcoming them more. And yes, it's 19th century according to Thomas.
Okay. So anyway, what I want to say is I think it's fantastic that philosophers are talking about religion, because I don't think they have been for some time in the culture. So I think that this is really extremely interesting and deep and provocative territory, and this whole group is kind of like spearheading that or on the edge of that. So and there's a really nice antagonism between people in this group that is still friendly. And so anyway, that's all I want to say, and to thank everyone for coming, and to maybe reiterate what Alex said is I hope we do it again, and this becomes kind of a regular thing. I like this. This is an experiment, so thank you for bearing with us, and we're trying to figure out new forms of how to have conversations. So it's all a big experiment, and it's all very rich and psychedelic and jarring and beautiful and insane. And so I'm very pleased with how this came about. So check out Parallax Sangha, check out Parallax, check out the IDW when we come back and have when we emerge and have these beautiful conversations. Thank you everyone for being here.